Hey, this is DJ Chris Allen talking to you from the Wayback Machine here at KSSU. Remember, be yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Bronte, your promo and events coordinator here at KSSU, and we're here for another alumni spotlight. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Prosio.
Awesome. And just tell us a little bit about like your connection with KSSU, or like when you were here at the station.
So, my connection to KSSU goes back to 1990. Myself, Jim Bolt, and a ragtag team of students were looking at the prospect that the campus was going to give the second FCC license that the university held to Capital Radio, and they were going to start a second public radio station. And there was still no student run station on campus. And we thought that was wrong. So we formed an organization very cleverly named the Associated Broadcasting Club, or ABC. And we started pestering the administration. We gained a little bit of support from the student bodies. We utilized the Hornet newspaper, as well as just talking to kids in the quad, in the union, and went about bringing up the idea of a student-run radio station on campus. We held different events like the 24-hour Music Madness Marathon there in the quad, where we played music for 24 hours straight. And we eventually got what we wanted in the sense of we called it KDG at the very beginning, and no one bothered to look up that there was another station in Las Vegas with the same call letters. But we got a cable current station that ran through the campus. It was a low wattage cable current technology, but it was a radio station run by students for the students there at Sac State. And that came about in 91, just as I was graduating. So I graduated the class in 91 with a communications degree. And I was around for the initial, we were doing some broadcast via the cable station there in Sacramento near the campus. And for the first couple of shows, I came back and did some airtime, but really the station took off after I graduated.
That's awesome. And what do you remember about the energy or the excitement leading up to like becoming an official station?
Oh, it was huge. So my role, I was the vice president of the ABC, but uh, for the station itself, I was the first music director. So I was contacting record labels and dealing with A&R guys, A&R people. Um, and we started collecting CDs, music for the station, even before there was a station. I remember we had three big boxes of discs just ready to go. Everyone was excited getting it in place that last semester. Once we had found out from the administration that we were going to be given a budget, everyone was just kind of moving forward. And our last Music Madness Marathon we did, huge turnout. It was a great time. There's still some pushback from some of the student body as far as utilizing budget for the station versus other uses. But I would say overall, people that I encountered when I was there at Sac State, it was positive. It was a positive thought to have a student-run radio station there on campus.
Yeah, I hear that a lot about the station being more of that like rebellious thing and having
Mm-hmm.
to like garner support through all the ways, and now it's like more structured and it's built into the budget. So it's cool to see student run radio from that like getting built from the ground up in that way.
Yeah,
And then you acted as music director during that startup
yeah.
semester, but as like the music director during the time, like what were your main responsibilities or what did that look like for you?
So as music director, because of the format, right? the way that in the beginning and even today, the student, the disc jockey, was designing their show. So typically a music director, like if I worked for a commercial radio station, music director is defining what that station is putting out, from the general class of music, right? If it's classic rock or if R&B or whatever. And then in some cases down to what songs get played on heavy rotation versus light rotation. In a station like KSSU, it's the students that's defining that. So my role as music director was really to bring in just a library of music that could be utilized to select from. Not that you had to select from it, but it was kind of like, here's just a repertoire of stuff that we have available that you can pull from. And a lot of it was the newer alternative, new for 1991, newer alternative music. But a lot of times, then and now, the person curating their show is bringing their own music to the tables. That's kind of the cool thing about something like KSSU, is it's not formatted from the sense of you have a top down, this is what we're going to play. You're getting the feel for that person and what they think is cool, what they're bringing to the table. It could be polka rap or something else, but you're getting it from them. It's what they think is fun and interesting.
I love that. And now we're in now we're in an age of like digital or like streaming platforms, right?
Yeah.
But how did you go about curating all of these artists? Like how did you find them?
So I didn't find the artist. So I sent letters. I'm back in the good old days with paper and stamps. I was sending letters to Warner Brothers Records, IRS Records, EMI, Atlantic. And I would say, look, we're a college radio station. We're looking for music. We're looking for something to play. And back in that time frame, you have what's called A&R people, album and record people. Their job was to go into an area like Sacramento and seek out new artists, as well as take the repertoire for, let's say, Warner Brothers Records, and go to the local radio stations and promote playing this song, this album on that station. So I would contact the record labels. Their A&R people would call me or contact me. They would get a feel for what we were looking for. And in that time frame, in our group that was pulling this together, we kind of leaned more heavily towards alternative rock and roll than any other type of music genre. So that's what the most of the stuff that I was getting at that time frame was kind of curated towards that, or what they called college radio. There's an actual, even to this day, if you look at the listings of how music is doing in one category or another, there's still a college radio category, and that's what we were pulling from. So, but I did it with pen, paper, and stamps.
That's so interesting. And how like that relationship with the record labels and like being so like tight knit with them, and now it feels like they're much like farther away, or especially like the Warner, like you mentioned, like there's more like barrier there.
It's even more than that with the advent of home studio recording and the internet, Spotify. As a musician, you're able to self-publish. Back in the good old days, it was very difficult. You could self-publish, but you were limited to, let's just say, a local band in Sacramento. You were limited to Sacramento or wherever else you were playing. Maybe you did a couple of gigs in San Francisco, and you would take your CDs with you, and you would sell your CDs at the show, and you sold 15 CDs. So there's now 15 people in San Francisco that know about your band, know about your music. Nowadays, with Spotify, and the internet, Instagram, TikTok, I can get my music seen by millions of people at one time. So the music label, the idea of the music label has diminished, or the power has diminished greatly. And it's just not the same thing anymore. I mean, today, if I was music director at KSSU, I wouldn't even bother with the record labels. They would probably be coming to me, if anything. I would be looking at TikTok, looking at Instagram, finding new artists, reaching out to them, going, "Hey, can I get, full copy, and how do I go about promoting your music?"
Absolutely. And there's so many indie artists, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them, the record labels are looking for people who are already popular, and then it's like, but they're already doing their own thing.
Yeah.
So, like, and they're building the relationships with the radio as indie artists.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
super cool to see that. And then to shift like to your radio show, like, do you
Sure.
remember your first show, or do you have any like memorable moments from being on the air?
So my first show ever was actually not with KSSU or KDG. I was a intern, and then I actually got a paying gig at, it was then 93 Rock. It's now 98 Rock here in Sacramento. So my first shift was at 2 a.m. Sunday morning. Nervous as all get out. I think I still have my air check tape somewhere around here. Voice cracking, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I had everything laid out, as far as I was told, these are the records that you're going to, or the tracks you're going to play. We used what was called carts. So that would be for your commercials or your public service announcements. You'd they were basically 8 tracks, but you put them in a cart player and you would fire them off. And I was just trying to figure out how I make this all happen. And I did. And the good news is while I did screw up, I actually had dead air. At one point, I had about 4 seconds of dead air. At 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, you know how many people are listening in Sacramento? About that many, about 0. But the program director of the station was listening, and she called me up afterwards, and she said, "Hey, that was a little rough, but you're doing fine." And I actually ended up doing that gig through the summer, working Sunday evenings, and then I was working in the music department. That's how I got to know a lot of the A&R people as well. I was working in the music department at 93 Rock, pulling stuff
Wow.
together.
I mean, thinking about being up at 2 a.m. and having to do the the shift that
Yeah,
probably a lot of people don't want, but still like going
that's
through with it and building from there.
that's
I
how you
love
break
that.
into this business. It's
Yeah.
the business has changed a little bit because of technology, and we're able to record and play back. But there's still small market radio stations where you've got a human being running the overnights, and that's how you get started in this business. It's not as glamorous as people would like to think.
Yeah, exactly. I've been there. I'm still in it. Like, doing the busy work, bringing the coffee, right?
Yeah,
And then yes, you worked in the department at 93 Rock and then also 98 Rock.
yeah.
And then how did that commercial radio experience then translate into like KSSU?
So the way it transitioned for KSSU was I was able to bring to the table those contacts. So I was working in the music department, which meant that I had some of those contacts with the record labels, and the ones that I didn't have, they gave me an idea how to reach out to the labels and who to talk to. So I just didn't send blind mail to the labels. I sent those letters, those targeted letters, directly to the right individuals that would be able to get me what I needed, or at least get me to the person to get me what I needed. Um, so that was the big part. The other part was, because I had spent time working in an actual real radio station, I was able to work with people like Jim Bassett, who was he was the engineer on our group, to define how the radio station was going to work, what pieces we actually needed, and some of the technology and just the general flow of how things work, which is a big thing. Everyone thinks they know how something's done until you do it. So I had a little bit of experience that I was able to bring to the table.
That's awesome. I mean, a lot of people, their first time on the radio is KSSU, so it's like kind of like backwards
Mm-hmm.
that you like had the internship, and then you went into the student run radio where you can make you could make a little bit more mistakes or have a little bit more grace, I would say. Yeah.
That's actually a good way to put it, and grace and actually artistic creativity as well. When you work for a commercial radio station, the key word there is commercial, and they're there to make money, and they're not there to allow some 19-year-old who wants to play the latest, screaming puppies music. That doesn't exist in commercial radio.
That's so true. And then you also mentioned helping write like some of the stations early on, like on air rules and
Yeah.
some of the structure. What were some of those like things that you wanted to establish, or what was that process in
Well,
setting those rules?
it was more about defining something as simple as at least once an hour, if not more, you have to give out the call letters of the station. And even though we were a cable current station and it wasn't going any farther than the campus, the FCC wasn't going to be listening in, we established those type of rules. It's like, okay, you need to announce the station letters. You need to announce certain number of PSAs. So we went to the organizations within the campus and we got different messages that needed to go out, public service announcements, PSA, and defining, okay, every hour you need to put this into your clock, right? And defining the idea of what a clock is. The show starts at the top of the hour and you need to be done by 59 minutes later if it's a 1 hour show, and defining how those transitions were going to happen between the different artists, the different DJs.
That's super awesome that you laid the rules and the groundwork that we carry on, today.
Oh, they were pretty rudimentary rules, and I guarantee you they've been tweaked to the better.
Yeah.
From what I
did. Yeah, I'm sure they've evolved, but like there's that foundation and it's still there.
Yeah.
And then like are you involved in music still today, or do you
so yes, I am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not to the point of working in radio. So it's kind of interesting. So I graduated in 91 and I went down to LA to seek fame and fortune in the recording industry. I was going to become a record producer, discover the next Beatles, and retire by the age of 35. Needless to say, I'm not 35 and I'm still working. I ended up falling into audiovisual work, doing show. I was producing shows for Microsoft and Motorola. I've been on the road. I've done some touring, but I work doing video projection, doing large event video projection for different elements, mostly corporate, but some entertainment. As far as music in my life, I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have a plethora of guitars. I still play out live a little bit here and there. I keep music in my life, but I haven't spun a record in 25 years.
Yeah. I mean, like music, I mean, that doesn't leave you, especially when it's like a passion or a part of your life. Like it's always going to be there no matter what. And I love your guitar collection in the back.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And do you feel like any of the skills you learn in college radio or even like radio in general in those formative years, did you carry any of those skills into like your later years or your adult years?
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to screw up. Number one. Number two, always be on time because the clock is always ticking. And probably the biggest thing was not even it's related to the radio station, but don't be afraid. Um, Going up to the president of the university as a 19, 20-year old and making demands, you get scared, you have butterflies, but then you realize at the end of the day, you bring something to the table. Even as a 19, 20-year-old, you have a voice and you have an opinion. You have a right to that opinion. They don't have to agree with it, but you have a right to it. Don't don't let the possibility of a no defer you from at least asking. Because if you don't ask, it's always a no. So that's probably the biggest thing I got out of this, out of establishing the station there on campus, was that if you're persistent and you're clear, and that's probably the other thing too, is understand what you're asking for and understand everything else that goes underneath that. Because it was one thing to say, we want to have student run radio. Okay, great. Then what? And we had a couple of professors, I still remember one of them, who was pretty adamant that the station wasn't going to last beyond the first group of kids, the founding members of the station, because there would be no one there to carry the torch. So that was part of the things that, mostly with Jim and the people that first generation that followed on, was keeping that torch and figuring out how to pass that torch down. But you can't just ask for, I want to be a DJ. It's like, okay, really, what do you want from this? And Jim and I had to, when we talked to the administration, it was like, okay, this is why. It's not just because we want to get out and play music that might have a few curse words in it. We want to be able to have students have an outlet, both creatively and then an ability to learn. Back in the day in the 90s, radio was big media, right? Terrestrial radio was still a big thing. So being able to learn how to do a radio show, how to be part of a radio station, the students didn't have that. There was no practical lab for the communication students to try this stuff out on. So that's how we ended up winning the station. It wasn't because they wanted to allow a bunch of students to get out there and play music that they wanted to play. It was the learning aspect and what that meant. So you had to define it deeper than just the top level. That's a long way to get to what you asked, but
Oh, that's perfect. I think that's so cool. And like we carry that um even to today because it's like a student or volunteer says, I want to do this. I want to do this sort of theme. I want to do this sort of program or event. And we're like, all right, like let's do it. We're like, how do we execute it? Like, how do we execute your vision? Um, and I think that's so awesome that we're able to do that. And it's why I love working here.
yeah. And it's a lot of fun, and it sets you up with a skill set. Even if you don't work in media, you graduate and you never work in media again, there's a skill set that you pull out of the radio station that you can take anywhere. It's relevant in any format.
I absolutely agree. And then for my last question,
Yeah.
you mentioned like the people saying like, hey, this is not gonna last.
Uh-huh.
And now we're here 35 years later and we're celebrating our 35th anniversary and also like
Uh-huh.
doing our alumni spotlight. But what does KSSU being here 35 years later mean to you, given what people said in the beginning?
It makes me extremely proud. Yeah, I still, to this day, on my wall, I have the declaration for the station, and I have a little. They gave me a plaque, or gave Jim and myself a plaque, some like 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. Um, Hell, it's still on my resume. And I've got years of job experience, and it still sits on the bottom of my resume. Not because anyone really cares if they're looking at my resume at this stage of my game that I put a radio station in 1990. it's more for me. It's the pride of saying I helped establish that. I was with a team of students learning how to make something happen. And like I said, it's pride. Um, and I'm very, very happy that it did survive more than the first, more than the second generation. I mean, we're now 35 years, it makes me feel old, 35 years past that. And it's actually survived beyond what terrestrial radio is. I mean, terrestrial radio is on a decline. Streaming, which essentially is what KSSU is now, is the future of how radio works. And the fact that KSSU could be called an early adopter of streaming is really cool.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Absolutely.